The Jericho Reach was never meant to be reopened. It lies past the edge of mapped space, through the blood-rimmed throat of the Jericho Moor Warp Gate, a relic from a forgotten empire, reactivated by imperial decree and sanctified with blood and fire. Beyond that portal, the stars do not shine clean. They flicker like dying embers. Charting this region is like trying to sculpt meaning from ash. Systems are devoured and reborn in the span of decades. Warp storms drift like contagion across subsector borders. Civilizations rise in isolation, only to fall in silence. This is not merely a theatre of war. It is a haunted ruin, a galactic graveyard walled off by time and myth. What remains today is a fragmented frontier, fractured between the crumbling echo of the Imperium's past and the clawing viral will of Xenos' dominions. It is a place of uncertainty, where the Imperium does not rule, it bleeds. The Achilles Crusade was meant to reclaim this region, to drive a spearhead of divine order into a realm thought long lost. And in many ways, it has. Watch fortresses burn with activity. Crusade fleets ripple through the dark on trails of atomized heresy. Faith still ignites like lightning along the hulls of macro haulers and shrine ships. But this reach remains unhealed. Every world taken cracks open another wound. It's a crucible not of conquest, but of attrition. Every gain is a loss in disguise. Each victory takes longer to validate, costs more to maintain, and reveals another layer of the unknown. And at the heart of that unknown, like a tumor in the void skin, drifts something far worse than resistance. Something that has no allegiance, no pattern, no reason, something older than conquest. The Imperium calls it a space hulk, but that term is insufficient. A space hulk is typically a derelict, twisted ruins of void ships fused by the tides of the immaterium, vomiting into real space like tumors ejected from the soul of the galaxy. They are legion. Most are scavenged. Many are destroyed. All are feared. They are not anomalies, they are symptoms. Wounds left behind by the warp. But the Mortis Thul is not a wound. It is a memory the galaxy cannot forget. There are dozens of names for it, scattered across dialects, chapters, factions, and worlds that no longer exist. In the Mechanicus lexicon, it is Warp Artifact Aleph Omicron 002. To the secret tongue of the navigators, it is the doom that awaits. In the Orpheus salient, among the veterans of failed landings and burned-out kill teams, it is known by one name alone, Mortis Thul, death from beyond the horizon. The last thing you see before your Vox dies screaming, before your augurs melt into static, before your Geller field collapses without impact or explanation, before your ship is no longer your own. If it appears in your system, you've already lost. It doesn't arrive like a vessel. It arrives like an event. One moment, nothing. The next, void warnings scream across thousands of kilometers, local gravitic fields spike, and the stars themselves flicker under the shadow of its mass. Those close enough to see it with the naked eye rarely live long enough to describe it. The few picked captures that survive are degraded, pulsing with radiation, distorted by the psychic backlash of its entry into reality. What emerges is never the same shape, never the same signature, but always, unmistakably, the same entity. A blackened blot in space, swollen with fused hulls and shattered planet-side matter. Torn cathedral prows clash with alien geometry. Oily bioship flesh pulses beside rusted manufactorum decks. It is shaped like nothing nature intended. Every time it returns, it is larger and more alive. It is not a singular mass. It is an ecosystem, a realm, a prison, a battlefield, and it is not dead. Some of the vessels still hum with unreliable energy. Some compartments still hold pressure. Others open directly into the void. The interior is not mapped, cannot be mapped. Its geometry warps. Rooms collapse, shift, vanish. The act of boarding it is not a mission. It is an invitation to disappearance. And still, they try. The Imperium has launched hundreds of missions to breach it. The Inquisition has authorized kill orders for entities within it. Deathwatch teams have entered it, never to return. Even rogue traders, ancient dynasties armed with privilege and desperation, have wagered entire fleets trying to extract what lies within. Because somewhere inside the Mortis Thul are things worth killing for, and dying for. But it is not the structure alone that poisons the void. It is the way it warps those around it. Planets that see it in orbit collapse into panic. Primitive worlds invent new religions around its silhouette. Civilized ones descend into mass suicides. Ships routed near it in the warp often emerge wrong, twisted in architecture, corrupted in crew. Time fractures, minds bend, Auspex fails. The Mortis Thul is not just a ruin, it is an infection. It haunts the Jericho Reach like an echo that can never fully vanish. And it has been doing so long before the Imperium returned, before the Achilles Crusade, before the Jericho Moor Gate was ever opened, before the Great Crusade even knew this place existed. It was here. There are records, fragmentary, discredited, buried in the back channels of the Ordo Xenos, of primitive pictoglyphs on Shinnō, a now lost world devoured during the Crusade. These symbols show a dark shape blotting out the sky, of earthquakes, of plague, of strangers with faces that were not faces. That was 12,000 years before the coming of the Emperor's fleets. It has returned again and again. Each time its presence triggers something: collapse, heresy, silence. Some Imperial scholars argue that the Hulk's recurrence correlates to the rise and fall of warp stability in the Reach. That every time the veil of the Imperium thins, Mortis Thul finds a crack to crawl through. Others suggest the opposite, that its arrival is what weakens reality itself. Either way, its effect is undeniable, which brings us to now. To the present state of the Jericho Reach, torn between fragile conquest and surging decay. Hive Fleet Dagon coils in the dark. Ork spores take root in abandoned bastions. Hirtex prowl ancient Manufactorum relics. And through all of it, the Mortis Thul moves like a shadow between systems. Sometimes it disappears for decades, sometimes it reappears 2 weeks later on the other side of the Reach. It has no pattern, no predicted course. Even the most advanced auguries and Mechanicus fate models can only suggest probabilities, never certainties. And when it returns, it is never the same. No two appearances match. Sometimes it bleeds asteroids behind it like blood clots. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it screams. The navigators have stopped trying to track it. The Deathwatch doesn't speak of it. The Inquisition speaks of little else. This is not a curiosity. This is not salvage. This is not lore. This is a threat that the Imperium does not know how to kill. And it is growing. It's difficult to define where Mortis Thul ends. More difficult still is defining where it begins. Every time it emerges from the warp, it's larger. That's not speculation, it's observation. There are vid captures, hull silhouettes compared, mass displacement records cross-referenced over centuries, and they all agree on one impossible thing: it's growing. A space Hulk is not supposed to do that, not like this. Their emergence is typically an act of violent disintegration. Warp trauma fractures hull integrity, breaking the derelict apart over time. Most Hulks decay, lose mass, or destabilize until they collapse into themselves or fade back into the immaterium. Mortis Thul doesn't decay. It assimilates. Whole vessels vanish without incident, only to reappear days, weeks, or decades later, fused into the Hulk's expanding shape. Entire fleets have gone missing near its coordinates. Often, 1 or 2 pieces show up again. A prow jutting from its flank, a shattered bridge embedded in one of its lower hull ridges, broadcasting death code vox bursts that echo a battle no one remembers launching. This isn't the random drift of warp-merged debris. It's not wreckage tumbling through fate. It's deliberate accumulation, and whatever is driving it does not want to be found. Mortis Thul does not appear on command, but it does appear with intent. There is a pattern, but one buried so deep, it requires a kind of lunatic logic to perceive it. The Ordo Xenos has tried. So has the Mechanicus. Diviners in service to the Inquisition have gone blind from overexposure to the data tangle. The Deathwatch, for their part, gave up long ago. They no longer attempt to anticipate its next appearance. Instead, they react like first responders to a plague outbreak. When it appears in a system, The Inquisition reroutes all astropathic traffic. Deathwatch kill teams are pre-authorized for immediate deployment. A no-landing writ is issued on all surrounding moons and orbital platforms. Navigators across 3 subsectors feel it hit their minds like a blunt trauma. Those who've lived long enough to experience its emergence more than once say it feels like déjà vu laced with nausea. Something old coming back with new teeth. Because the Mortis Thul doesn't just appear, it doesn't just exist, it disrupts. And then there are the suns. This part isn't speculative either. It's happened. Not once. Not rarely. Repeatedly. When the Mortis Thul enters a system, something happens to the local star. It dims. Sometimes it's barely perceptible. Astronomical, not visual. But in at least 9 documented cases, the star itself flickered or receded. Photonic readings dropped. Lumen output fell by as much as 12% across entire hemispheres of the inhabited planets. It doesn't last. And it doesn't leave a mark. But it happens. Multiple sectors now house dead colonies, settlements driven mad by the momentary loss of sunlight. Agri-worlds whose crops failed because of 23 minutes of unexpected darkness. Hive cities that declared secession because their power systems temporarily collapsed under a logic cascade triggered by environmental fluctuation. The stars dim when Mortis Thul appears. It doesn't attack. It doesn't announce itself. It just makes the universe go wrong. If this was simply a matter of mass, there'd be a solution. If it was just a piece of debris, a fleet could intercept it. Exterminators protocols, cyclonic torpedoes. A wall of Imperial might launch toward a singular, definable threat. But Mortis Thul isn't that kind of enemy. It's not fighting a war. It's not enacting a plan. It is the absence of both. And that absence is more terrifying than any tactic. The Deathwatch has a term for it. Not one they use publicly. Not in records. Not even in shared vox. It's spoken during quiet rearmaments in the armories of Watch Fortress Eriok. During low-voiced rites of armor donning. Etched into purity seals that are removed before boarding the next Thunderhawk. The Star Eater. Because the name Mortis Thul isn't enough anymore. The old terms, hulk, derelict, ruin, none of them apply. This isn't a battlefield. It's not a mission zone. It's an event horizon. Those who go near it do not return the same. Those who try to study it do not agree on what they saw. Those who dream of it, because that happens too, wake up altered. One inquisitorial record from the Solace system logs 7 astropaths purged within 40 hours of Mortis Thul's appearance. Not because they communicated heresy, because they began speaking in unison, describing rooms they'd never been in, reciting coordinates that don't exist. One tried to blind herself. Another simply walked into the void. That transmission was never decoded, because the tech priest who handled the pict recorder vanished within 12 hours of viewing it. His bunkmate was found catatonic, repeating only one phrase. It blinked. So what does it want? That's the question every scholar, every tactician, every field commander with a clear data file has asked. And the most honest answer is nothing. Because Mortis Thul does not engage. It appears, it expands, it consumes, it disappears, it does not negotiate, it does not transmit, it does not signal recognition, or resistance, or even rage. It simply is, a manifestation of entropy, a roving grave. But that absence of motive hasn't stopped the Imperium from assigning meaning. The navigators say it marks the thinning edge of the warp, that it moves according to some unseen galactic current, and its path is a warning. That it's not the threat, but the signal of one. The Adeptus Mechanicus believes it is being pulled unconsciously by a gravitational beacon, one possibly linked to the Jericho warp gate. Some argue the two are symbiotic. That every Imperial pulse through the Maw weakens reality enough for the Thul to slip through more easily. Others within the cult Mechanicus reject even that theory. They believe the Mortis Thul may be a living data loom, a self-assembling machine god fragment from a time before the Emperor, before Terror, before history had ink, and that it is growing not in hunger, but in revelation, fusing itself from the wreckage of every age it touches, compiling a consciousness too vast to detect. The Inquisition, as always, says nothing, but their actions betray urgency. Kill teams are rerouted before requests are filed. Vessels sent to monitor it are scrubbed of all records before they dock again. Deaths are not logged, just cleansed. And sometimes, just sometimes, entire Deathwatch missions are coded only with one phrase. Omega Vault Decree. Those words are not explained. They are not clarified. They are not questioned. They are acted upon, and those who return do not speak of what they saw. Because the Mortis Thul is not just a danger. It is a place that rewrites the meaning of danger. It doesn't kill you. It removes what made you someone who could be killed. This is where we find ourselves now. Not on the edge of a battle, not in the midst of a campaign, but in orbit of something worse. Something that has waited long enough to become a myth, and grown long enough to make the myth real. This isn't folklore. This isn't corrupted history. This is happening, and it is still growing. You can measure the power of an enemy by the silence it creates. Mortis Thule has never announced itself. It issues no declarations. It broadcasts no demands. And yet, its presence has dictated the behavior of some of the Imperium's most clandestine and aggressive factions. How? By forcing them to name it. The first designation came from the Ordo Xenos. In an unsealed transmission now buried beneath 10 layers of security clearance, a Magos epistemologis of the 427th Explorator Fleet referred to the Hulk as Warp Artifact Aleph Omicron 002. This was not reverent. It was a classification, a containment tag for the unquantifiable, a label designed to isolate fear inside rational boundaries. But no one uses that name in the field, because it's not a label you shout when your Vox goes dark. It's not what your squadmate screams when the Auspex short circuits and your auto senses start showing corpses on every deck. Number out there, on the perimeter, names have to mean something. They have to carry the weight of recognition, of knowing, of warning. Which is why the Deathwatch call it Mortis Thul. Death beyond the threshold. The name is whispered in litanies before boarding runs. It's etched into bolter casings with blood-bound script. It's burned into the shrine alcoves of Watch Fortress Eriok, not as a symbol of triumph, but as a marker of those who never returned. The name matters, because if you're saying it, you're still alive. But Mortis Thul is older than even the Deathwatch's first record of it, which is why it has other names. Across different cultures, dialects, and corrupted Vox archives, it manifests as the Void King, the Black Pilgrim, the House of Echoes, the Womb that Hunts, the Emissary of Ash. Some of these names are blasphemies, others are myths, but all of them agree on one point. It's not a place you find, it's a place that finds you. The Navigators, those mutated sacred-blooded warp seers whose minds shape the Imperium's path through the immaterium, have their own term for it. They do not speak it aloud, but it exists in their cant. The doom that awaits. The phrase is old, predating the Jericho warp gates reactivation. Some believe it comes from the warp glyph dreams passed down in navigator lineages. Others argue it was coined the first time a navigator felt Mortis Thul pass by in the warp and recognized it from visions they'd never spoken of. When questioned, most navigators refuse to elaborate. But those who do speak, carefully, behind sigil-warded doors, describe something deeper than fear. They speak of psychic inertia, of a presence so massive in the warp that it cannot be felt directly, only as a pulling absence, a drag on perception, a gravity of meaninglessness. One navigator described it as a blind spot that blinks back. Another tore out his own eye. Language fails when facing the Mortis Thul, not because it's ineffable, but because it's worse when you try to define it. There are inquisitorial transcripts from surviving rogue trader expeditions that describe Voxcant deteriorating aboard boarding parties. Words that made sense on the shuttle stopped working inside the Hulk. Terminology frayed. Syntax broke down. One recorded conversation consists of 10 minutes of a pilot repeating the word light in 5 different tenses, none of which existed in High Gothic. Another kill team entered with synchronized comm beads, reporting fluently every 20 seconds. By the 3-minute mark, one voice was speaking in reversed battle cant. By the 5-minute mark, 2 had gone silent. The last broadcast, "We are not alone. We are not. We are. We..." Then nothing. This is not chaos in the literal sense. This is not demonic manifestation or overt warp intrusion. That's what makes it more dangerous. The Mortis Thul defies easy categorization. It is not a chaos hulk. No marks of the ruinous powers, no pacts, no cult banners, no sigils scorched into metal. That absence makes it worse. The Imperium knows how to hate chaos. It knows how to purge it. But this is like trying to hunt a nightmare you didn't have. The Adeptus Mechanicus, of course, refuses to leave the naming question to superstition. Across various redacted data scrolls, the Thul is referred to by a range of classification attempts. Macrostructural warp surge aggregation entity, anomalous mass-bound psychoactive composite, causal drift beacon complex. None of these labels explain anything. They only give shape to bureaucratic fear. One tech priest of Ryza, when questioned about the Hulk, responded with a single line. It bears memory, but not of us. That log was deleted within 2 cycles. The priest's shell was recovered in the Temple of Logic, surrounded by shattered cogitator screens and 1,000 etched binary prayers, each ending in a different definition of silence. The Mechanicus has since classified Mortis Thul as non-recoverable, non-isolatable, and high contagion, though they continue to send remote probes and pulse mapping drones. None have returned with coherent data. Some send back sensor logs showing ship layouts that do not match their deployment schematics. Some show images of corridors that were never entered. Others simply repeat the words, "Begin again." The Ordo Malleus refuses to acknowledge Mortis Thul's existence. Not publicly, not officially. And that silence is perhaps the most damning name of all. Because silence from the Inquisition is not absence, it's containment. The Ordo Xenos has issued 5 separate containment doctrines across sectors that have reported Thule's emergence. Each lists a different designation. Each comes with pre-typed post-mortem rights for any Astartes involved in boarding actions. These are not advisories. They are death notices, written in advance. Not all names are official. Some come from those who've never left their homeworld. Farmers, vox clerics, unenlightened regimental scribes who've never seen a starport. And even they know the name Mortis Thul. Even they tell stories. Of a star going dark and never returning. Of ships that fell from the sky like tombstones. Of songs that come through broken vox units when the wind rises in the wrong direction. Of black metal scraping across the clouds like an ocean god's anchor. They call it the grave moon, the black choir, the harbinger of hunger. These are not tactical reports, they are cultural scars. Proof that even in the absence of knowledge, even in ignorance, something in the human soul can still recognize when it is being watched. So where did the name Mortis Thul actually begin? Some believe it came from the doomed joint expedition of Archmagos Mitzvian Delphos and rogue trader Hyrus Tarrant in the 33rd millennium. That campaign launched from the Void Shoals near Phonos, where both factions sought to claim the Hulk for archaeotech recovery. Initial landings were successful. Mechanicus forces reported capturing Xenos containment cells, vaults of pre-imperial cogitator cores. Tarrant's private guard seized a library of etched voidstone tablets, some so old they carried symbols not recognized by any modern lexicon. Then the fighting began, not with the Hulk, but between each other. Hours of silence on all channels, then fragmented screams, then a Deathwatch ship arriving too late to intervene, recovering only one lifeboat and a hull core filled with bone ash. Delphos and Tarrant vanished. Nothing was found of their remains. Nothing survived but a half-scorched vox log from Tarrant's daughter Minerva. She named the Hulk herself in her final transmission. May the Mortis Thul devour itself. Let it drift alone, a death beyond all reach. It was a curse, but the name stuck. What started as grief became gospel. House Tarrant withdrew from the Reach entirely. Minerva placed a bounty so vast on any data regarding her father's fate that entire mercenary guilds rose and fell trying to chase whispers of what had happened inside the Hulk. The name circulated in their wake. By the time the Achilles Crusade began, the Deathwatch were already using it in briefing protocols. Crusade Command referred to it in threat archives. Pilgrims mentioned it in passing prayer. It became a fixed point in the terror map of the Reach, and the name became what it always had been, A warning. This is not just a hulk. It's not even just a haunted battlefield. It is a memory trap. A gravity well of forgotten names and lost voices and half-formed prayers. And when you say its name, you feel the weight behind it. The names it has already devoured. The names waiting to be added. And you understand. You do not name it to define it. You name it to survive it. Long before it was named. Long before it became a mission parameter, a prayer, a death sentence wrapped in coded protocol. Mortis Thul was something else. Not a myth, not yet. A presence, something vast, wordless, seen only in fragments across a dying galaxy's memory. And the first to record it weren't scribes. They were cave painters. On Shinnō, an unremarkable world rimward of the Slinar Drift, there are no surviving cities, no great cathedrals, no active Vox relays. The surface is fused. The atmosphere remains toxic, still crawling with isotopic decay from the orbital bombardment carried out during the Great Crusade. But beneath its surface, buried in cave networks untouched by the fires above, lies one of the Imperium's oldest surviving visual records of the Mortis Thul. Scratched into stone with bone and burnt ore, these pictoglyphs do not show saints or gods. They show a shape, too angular to be a moon, too irregular to be a craft, a blot drawn with dozens of hands, overlapping, repeating, always the same, towering above crude depictions of men, casting rays of darkness down from the stars. Beneath it, figures wail, arms raised, then burn, then fall. One glyph shows it split in half, then whole again. Another shows it eating the sun. The pics date to a period 12,000 years before the arrival of the Emperor's forces. 12,000. Before the Unification Wars. Before the rise of Old Night. Before psychers were named. Before terror remembered itself. And yet it was already here. That fact alone terrifies every serious scholar who studies the Reach, because that means Mortis Thul did not emerge during the rise of warp travel. It did not form from the accidents of the Imperium's spread. It did not come from us. It predates everything. The 427th Expeditionary Fleet uncovered these glyphs in the early days of the Great Crusade, during a routine compliance action against Shinnō's pre-atomic tribal populations. Initial orbital scans indicated primitive life, non-compliant, but no signs of Xeno's corruption. The usual course of action would have been enforced Imperial truth via surgical planetary pacification. But the pics changed that. The presence of warp symbolic geometry so far outside known psychically active regions drew immediate attention from the Ordo Xenos, even in its protoforms. Mechanicus xenologians logged 3 cycles of deep core survey, extracting a set of tablets coated in mineral residue that resisted all conventional Auspex classification. The translation was never completed, because before they could finish, Shinnō was declared spiritually contaminated. A decision handed down not by command staff, but by the Librarius Division attached to the 22nd Legion detachment overseeing the fleet. Records show that a Deathwatch observation team, unnamed, unaffiliated, had already been dispatched prior to the compliance order. Their presence was unexplained. 2 nights later, the order to burn the world was issued. No explanation was recorded, but the tablets weren't destroyed. They were taken, encoded, sealed, and locked within a vault now designated only as Omega Prime glass. Location redacted, contents unknown, but a record exists. And within that record, one translated phrase survived before the planet burned. 6 words: the sky fell in pieces, then screamed. From there, the trail grows cold. For centuries, there is no sign of the Hulk. Not in records, not in tales, not in fleet encounters or warp anomalies. If it returned, no one survived to tell it. If it stayed dormant, no one found it. Some claim this was its hibernation. Others believe it was feeding. But when it re-emerged, the Reach would never be the same. The next verifiable sighting comes thousands of years later, during the twilight of the 33rd millennium. A region of space known as the Phonos Shoals, an empty corridor of wreckage-strewn void near a failed mining colony, experienced a sudden catastrophic Vox outage across 8 adjacent systems. All interstellar traffic halted. The local Mechanicus refueling spires lost contact with their orbital stations. The only transmission that made it out was a data pulse from a mid-range auger station situated between Phonos and the nearest jump route to the Veiled Passage. It read, "It has returned. The tide is not water." The expedition that followed would go down as one of the most infamous failed joint operations in Reach history. Led by Archmagos Mitzvian Delphos, a revered mind theurgist whose logic arrays spanned 10 coprocessors, and rogue trader Hyrus Tarrant, a dynasty lord with a warrant of trade older than the ecclesiarchy itself, the assault was meant to be decisive. 31 ships, 7 boarding units, 2 Deathwatch kill teams operating under sealed purview. They dropped onto the Hulk together. Only 1 ship came back. The surviving accounts vary wildly. Some say the Hulk fought back, decks rearranging, walls closing in, gravity shifting between blinks. Others say there was no resistance, no enemy, no fight, only confusion, isolation, madness. Boarding parties began firing on each other. Autologs from the Tarrant Dynasty cruiser show friendly fire incidents erupting within the first hour of boarding. Later logs show units screaming at reflections that weren't theirs. Laughter coming through bolter comms. Entire vox chains chanting in languages nobody present spoke. And then nothing. Tarrant's daughter, Minerva, issued the withdrawal order herself, against all protocol. She left her father behind. No trace of him or Delphos was ever found. Only a single lifeboat emerged. Its occupants were blind. One was muttering the same phrase over and over again. "It remembers too much." That's when the name resurfaced. Minerva called it the Mortis Thul in her debriefing, a death that waits across the border of sense, not an enemy, a threshold. And once you crossed it, you weren't coming back whole. From that moment on, it was known, not formally, not sanctioned, but it was known. Whispers spread across the ranks of the Deathwatch, the Ordo Xenos, the Navis Nobilite. Whenever something strange happened in the Reach, a lost ship, a blackout, a failed translation drive, they didn't say enemy activity. They said quietly, "Check for Thule traces." And still, it kept returning. Not frequently, not predictably, but just often enough that everyone remembered the name. A Goliath-class station found fused into its hull, still broadcasting old Imperial rallying cries despite being missing for 2 centuries. A fragment of a Mechanicus Ark ship lodged in its outer decks, its machine spirit still active, begging to be erased. An Eldar cruiser split clean in half inside the Hulk, the other drifting with a crew reduced to fossilized silhouettes burned into the walls. Every time it appeared, it brought a piece of history with it. Every time it vanished, it took more away. And then, silence again. For almost 1,000 years. Until the Jericho warp gate reopened. Until the Imperium returned, and Mortis Thul was waiting. The Achilles Crusade had barely begun when it was first spotted, hanging in orbit over a dead system near the edge of the Canis salient. No signals, no resistance, just mass, shadow, and an Imperial strike cruiser gutted from prow to engine buried in its flank. How did it get there? No warp signature matched, no record of combat in that region. The ship wasn't missing. It was still docked at Eriok the night before, except now it wasn't. Except now it was part of the Thule. That incident changed everything. The Inquisition authorized full interdiction across 3 subsectors. The Deathwatch reactivated 5 dormant kill teams. The Adeptus Mechanicus declared the Hulk's data profile non-convergent, meaning it could no longer be analyzed by standard logic matrices. Exploration stopped, engagement ceased, and the Thule became something new, something not meant to be fought, something only to be endured. From that point forward, the Imperium no longer looked for explanations. Only containment, only mitigation. Because the truth was now obvious. This thing was never ours to understand. It was not created in our wars, it was not shaped by our sins, and it came before, and it will remain long after. This is what came before the myths. Before the tactics, before the heresies and heretics and kill teams and extraction logs. Before the silenced missions and the blinking stars and the screams in mirrored vox loops. This is where Mortis Thule started. Not as a weapon, not as a ruin, but as a memory too old to die. There is no such thing as a fixed layout, no definitive map, no reliable ingress route. Because Mortis Thule is not a single structure, it is a graveyard that grows. From orbit, the shape looks familiar, until you try to track it. Sections twist, hulls rotate, entire mass blocks drift like bones in a corpse mire, only to reattach in different alignments minutes later. A cargo bay that led to a derelict shrine ship yesterday might now open into the digestive remains of a tyrannid bioschooner. A hallway mapped by Deathwatch sensors will collapse during translation re-entry and fuse with 3 Xenos wrecks that weren't there before. This isn't decay, it's mutation, not biological, not demonic, something else. Space hulks, by definition, are amalgamations, chaotic masses of void ships fused together by warp tides and gravitational trauma. But Mortis Thule doesn't just gather wreckage, it assimilates it. New ships don't crash into the Thule, they phase into it. Some arrive whole, others are stripped down, outer decks sheared clean, innards splayed across corridors like offerings. Sometimes only partial remains are found, bridges, engines, command thrones with no bulkheads. And the fusion isn't random, it's patterned, intelligent. Auger readings show power conduits rerouted, fuel cores resynced across different vessels, ventilation systems jury-rigged across incompatible technologies. It's not a hulk, it's a habitat, and it's alive in more ways than one. The interiors still pulse with atmosphere in places. Decks hold pressure. Gravity fluctuates, not erratically, but tactically. Survivors report gravity shifts right before ambushes. Airlocks seal seconds before boarding parties enter rooms that should have been decompressed. This is not entropy, this is intent. The Mechanicus has tried to trace the structure. They've used burrowing torpedoes, pulse map transponders, warp-marked servo skulls. All lost, or worse. The data that does return is corrupted within days. Structural models degrade. Coordinates loop. One data slate broadcasted its own disassembly logs until it melted. No reconstructions match. No layouts repeat. The Hulk rebuilds itself between sightings. There's a reason. Because Mortis Thule isn't just swallowing ships. It's stealing stories. Every ship inside carries a past, a failure, a silence, and the Hulk remembers each one. You can walk from a Mechanicus survey frigate into an Eldar Wraith cruiser, then into an Imperial pilgrim barge half-fused with Ork engine decks. And in every one, something remains, not just relics, not just data. Intent. Explorators have recovered a Navis Nobilite stasis pod that predates known Terran manufacture, Vox logs repeating prayers to saints who were never canonized. A macro cannon trained inward. Why would a macro cannon face inside the Hulk? Who fired it? What were they trying to kill? These are not wrecks, they are tombstones, interred together in a structure that doesn't forget. And the worst part? Every time Mortis Thule returns, it's bigger. This is not drift, it is directional memory. A place that grows by dragging the past into itself. It doesn't age, it collects. And inside, every corridor has a history you were never meant to survive. There's no front line, no battle map, no clear objective, no war plan that holds past first contact. Because you don't fight Mortis Thule, you enter it. And that's enough to die. The Deathwatch has engaged it more than any other Imperial force, but engagement is misleading. These aren't sieges, they aren't purges. They're surgical extractions, kill confirmations, or last-ditch sabotage strikes. Missions that end with scrambled Vox and broken return schedules. Objectives rewritten mid-flight, memory blackouts, Vox logs overwritten with nothing but coordinates and the words, "Don't send more." Every kill team that boards the Hulk does so knowing two things. They are likely not coming back. And if they do, they won't come back the same. Inside the Watch Fortress Eriok, in a sealed chamber beneath the Hall of Oaths, there is a wall. It is made of names. Each one etched by hand, blade-tipped to ceramite. Each one a space marine who entered Mortis Thule and didn't return. Not all are declared dead. Some are simply missing. And those are the names that terrify the chaplains most. Because those names might come back. One day, wearing the wrong armor. The Inquisition is no less affected. At least 37 missions have been launched by direct inquisitorial decree. Not all were meant to destroy. 5 were rescues. agents lost inside the Thule with data that couldn't be allowed to die. One mission was to silence a vessel broadcasting encrypted signals in pre-Imperial Low Gothic, coded in a pulse that mirrored the Astronomican's waveform. No agent returned from that mission. But afterward, the Mortis Thule didn't appear again for 17 years. Correlation is not confirmation, but it's the closest the Ordo ever gets to closure. Then there are the others, the ones that aren't logged, that don't appear on any slate, that exist only as rumours and half-muttered prayers during rearmament rites, the ones marked Omega Vault Decree. Deathwatch librarians do not explain these missions, they do not brief them aloud. The kill team receives their orders in sealed purity cases, opened only in flight. Their mission parameters are not recorded, only the results. Returned, negative, or sometimes worse, returned, null. What that means is unknown, and no one asks. Because the last librarian who tried to analyze a string of Omega Vault missions was found days later, in a trance, whispering in binary to a wall that wasn't there. He was transferred to an Ordo Malleus quarantine ship. That ship is now missing. The Imperium does not hold ground inside Mortis Thul. It infiltrates, it stabs, and it bleeds. And sometimes, rarely, it escapes. But never unchanged. What the Deathwatch understands, what they've never said aloud, is that they are not fighting to cleanse the Hulk. They are fighting to contain the things that come out of it. Or worse, the things that follow the ones who escape. Inside the Mortis Thul, there are no empty halls. Every chamber breathes with something, a presence, a history, a hunger. And over time, those left inside don't just die, they adapt. Or worse, they forget they were ever anything else. It starts with the Hulgasts. Humans, originally. Crew left behind. Pilgrims, guardsmen, deck servants. Survivors of ships pulled into the Thul's expanding carcass. They should have died. Many did. But those who didn't became something else. Warp exposure, radiation, starvation, generations of breeding in sealed compartments and decompressed passages. What crawled out the other end was not human. Their skin is bleached, torn by growths of keratin and bone. Their limbs stretched wrong, spindly, jointed like wire. Eyes gone. Noses fused. They move by memory, by vibration, by the scent of fungus and blood. Some speak in grunts, others in broken binaric code like forgotten cogitators screaming for maintenance. They travel in packs, they hunt, they feed. And when they die, they whisper names no one taught them. Names of ships, names of stars, names of gods that were never canonized, but they aren't the only ones. Deep in the fused remains of the Emperor's gaze, a courier vessel lost during the earliest phase of the Achilles Crusade, there's still life. Actual, structured, faithful life. The crew remains. Barely. They ration their energy to preserve a flickering Geller field. They feed on hydrofungus and filtered water scraped from pipe condensation. And most importantly, they pray. Loud. Daily. Without fail. Their hymns echo through the halls, bleeding into the dead Vox systems of other ships. Sometimes you hear them when you're not near them. Explorators have walked into completely different decks and heard the choir of the gaze, echoing across lightless corridors. No one knows how, but it's kept them alive. Dozens of years, maybe more. They chant not just to the Emperor, but to themselves, reminding each other they're still real, that they haven't been forgotten, that they still have names. A name means you exist. A name is armor in a place like this. The Hulk isn't still. It shifts, warps. But not everything inside has gone mad. Some cling to purpose, or mimic it. There are sealed vaults that still hum with atmospheric pressure. Cogitator terminals that light up when approached. Running programs older than the Imperium. Medical bays sterilizing non-existent wounds. Auto-altars reciting sermons in high Gothic to no one. And sometimes, someone responds. A feral man in a preacher's stole, backed by a tribe of scarified acolytes who mistake stim injectors for holy sacraments. A half-masked servitor still lighting incense sticks in sequence, waiting for a Magos who's been dead for 4 millennia. A small child in power armor too big for them, carrying a bolter they can't lift, leading 3 others through a broken hallway filled with bones arranged in perfect ecclesiarchal hexagrams. They live, somehow, and you cannot help but wonder, are they survivors, or are they part of the Hulk now? Because that's the real question. When you stay too long inside Mortis Thul, you stop being inside it, you become part of its memory, and the Hulk does not forget. There's no clear line between survivor and haunt. No distinction between what clings to faith and what's been rewritten by it. The Emperor's gaze may still hold its shape, still sing its rites. But what if that's all it is now? A song. A liturgical recording on loop. A memory of belief echoing long after the body has rotted. And if that's true, then what else inside isn't real anymore? The Mortis Thul doesn't just kill, it preserves. It embalms belief, corpses of doctrine fused into bulkheads, screams fossilized in vox loops, priests turned into systems maintenance logs. It isn't a ruin, it's a tomb cathedral of lost intentions. And every time a new boarding party steps inside, they bring more liturgy, more fear, more memory. The Hulk swells with it, and every prayer whispered too close to a rusted shrine might just whisper back. The Mortis Thul is not empty. It is full, overrun, contested, territorial. Within its impossible halls, empires rise and fall in the span of hours. Civilizations collapse before they ever name themselves. Because inside this drifting monolith, nothing is still, and nothing is safe. Especially from each other. The Genestealers are the most numerous. Not Tyranids, Genestealers. Pure strain and hybrid. Clawborn and 4th-generation infiltrators, survivors of old broods and new infestations. They don't roam the Hulk, they occupy it. Whole sectors are theirs, vaults sealed off, infested hulls turned into spawning dens. You don't stumble into their territory, you trespass. And if you're lucky, you die quickly. But most don't, because Genestealers don't kill outright unless they have to. They wait, lurk, breathe just long enough to implant you. That's their real weapon. Not claws, not speed, not strength, infection. The viral genome they carry doesn't just mutate a host, it rewrites them. Physically, psychically. 1st-generation spawn are monsters, barely sentient, but the 2nd and 3rd generations look almost human. They can speak, think, remember your name. They can beg for mercy, then slit your throat with an extra limb they didn't have the day before. By the 4th generation, you're not sure they aren't human, and that's the point. They seed doubt, and if even one ship leaves Mortis Thul with a single infected soul on board, it's not a Hulk anymore, it's a vector. That's why the Deathwatch doesn't just cleanse hulls, they vaporize them. Any vessel that breaks from the Hulk and doesn't submit to full quarantine and incineration is targeted without warning. No mercy, no exceptions. Even one surviving Genestealer can doom a subsector. And Mortis Thul has thousands, some in stasis pods, some trapped behind broken blast doors, clawing at walls for decades, some commanding entire hybrid cults that run functioning power grids. The Ordo Xenos believes that if you could map the internal spread, the Thul would qualify as a full-blown Genestealer cult world. But you can't, because it never stops changing, and they never stop breeding. But they are not alone. They are not the apex predators here. Because something else stalks the Hulk, and even the Genestealers fear them. The Enslavers. Most who enter the Mortis Thul never see them. But the signs are there. Twisted flesh arches in empty corridors. Melted psyche remains, still screaming silently. Craters in the warp where souls once existed. Enslavers are not Xenos in the conventional sense. They are extrusions, ancient warp parasites. They manifest through psyches, bend minds to their will, and consume entire populations by pulling them into their dimension. And Mortis Thul is full of psychic bait. Every Genestealer has a broodmind link. Every hybrid generation has latent psychic resonance. Some cults even deliberately elevate psyches to strengthen their psychic field, unknowing that they're shining like beacons to the Enslavers watching from the Imperium. When they come through, the warp fractures, not visibly, not loudly, but fundamentally. Whole decks become psychic pressure cookers. Gravity fails, perception collapses. Some victims just walk away, never to be seen again. Others scream themselves to death, begging for someone to turn off the song. Enslavers don't negotiate, they don't feed, they replace. A squad that enters a zone with active enslaver contamination might turn their guns on each other mid-step, or drop them and start rearranging corpses into symbolic patterns they've never seen before. Deathwatch protocols state clearly, if enslavers are suspected, immediate total immolation, no recovery, no extraction, burn everything. There are stories, worse than the rest, of Genestealers turning on their own, broods collapsing into civil war, hybrids hunting their patriarchs, cults swallowing glow sticks laced with toxin just to silence the connection. Because the brood mind makes them visible, and enslavers don't care who they take. Some Genestealers now seal themselves in cryo-caskets, guarded by their loyal kin, who kill themselves after activation, to preserve the bloodline. Because in this twisted ecosystem, the only thing more dangerous than being hunted is being found. But chaos doesn't end there. Because while the Tyranids and Enslavers fight in the shadows, the Orks are having the time of their lives. They don't infest the Hulk, they ride it. Mech boys see Mortis Thule not as a tomb, but as a vehicle, a mobile fortress, a seed drifting through systems like a spore. They build camps on the outer hull, ramshackle gantries with force fields and cannon nests. They leap from it in stolen transports, launch rocks from decayed launch bays, strap boarding torpedoes to their own heads and hope for the best. The Hulk gives them what they want: movement, madness, metal. And they give it something back: noise, explosions, drums, guttural war songs echoing through empty cathedral decks. Their presence is impossible to predict. Some go dormant between warp jumps, frozen in place. Others attack boarding teams out of sheer instinct, then forget they did it. They fight Genestealers for sport. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose and come back meaner. And it gets worse, because Orks don't believe in uncleared territory. If a door is sealed, they'll open it. If a deck is unstable, they'll blast through. They don't care if something's cursed, or sacred, or was meant to stay locked. They break every wall, every time. And in Mortis Thul, walls are there for a reason. The Orks have let things out, things no one expected to see. Feral Xenos, pre-Imperial monsters, entire holds filled with hostile Wraithbone constructs. One team reported a stasis chamber that opened into what looked like the interior of a planet-sized creature's eye. It blinked. They never returned. So inside the Mortis Thul, the real truth emerges. This isn't just a battlefield. It's a food chain. A self-contained war zone of parasitic systems locked in eternal combat, never breaking equilibrium, always feeding on one another. And every boarding party is just another ingredient. Because here, in this moving necropolis, there are no innocents, only meat and memory. There are places inside Mortis Thul that no one mapped, not because they couldn't, but because they shouldn't. Some corridors collapse behind you. Others weren't there when you passed the first time. And sometimes, you'll find yourself back where you started, only the deck sigils are different, and your Auspex is picking up 3 heartbeats inside your armor. This isn't just psychic interference, it's geometry breaking. The Adeptus Mechanicus has deployed thousands of pulse beacons into the Thul over the centuries. Each one burrows deep, drops a signal core, and begins mapping telemetry data of the surrounding mass. Within hours, the signal loops. Within days, it scrambles. Within weeks, it starts broadcasting back data from ships that no longer exist. One beacon claimed to be lodged inside an Adeptus Custodes Custodian-class dreadnought. No record of such a vessel exists. The beacon was destroyed in orbit by inquisitorial order. Another reported finding a perfectly preserved city, complete with atmosphere, gravity, and a functioning defense grid. No one verified it. The ship that launched that probe went silent 38 seconds later. The interior of the Hulk is a trap made of memory. Sometimes physical, sometimes psychic, always hostile. Deathwatch squads report hulls shifting behind them, grav fields flipping as they breach sealed sections. One kill team tried marking their route with melter-burned sigils. The marks moved. It's not just the space that changes, it's the mind. Astartes with decades of psychic resistance experience hallucinations. They hear names they've never spoken aloud. See brothers long dead. One librarian slit his own throat mid-chant because he saw the vault open early. He had never been briefed on the Omega Vault. No one had spoken of it in weeks. And yet, he knew the sequence. The Omega Vault is not a myth. Not poetic license, not Deathwatch mysticism. It is real. A sealed chamber within Watch Fortress Eriok. Accessible only through an unknown mechanism, believed to be tied to prophecy, pattern convergence, or divine machine logic. When a mission inside Mortis Thul is labelled Omega Vault Decree, it means something deeper than intelligence gathering. Something has aligned, and something must be acted upon. We don't know what's inside the vault. We don't know how it knows. But we do know what follows. Kill teams leave in silence, their armour unadorned, their purity seals black. Sometimes they carry no weapons, sometimes they carry one. But they always carry something else. The certainty they're not expected to return. These missions are not meant to succeed. They are meant to interrupt, to delay, to prevent something from waking up or from arriving too soon. Sometimes they're sent to specific hulls that don't exist in any other record. Sometimes they're sent to kill things that were never named. One report marked a target only as IT. When questioned, the scribe said there was no other word, that using more would give it shape. She was silenced within the hour. Explorators speak of vaults within vaults, massive interior chambers that couldn't fit inside the mass of the Hulk, but do. A cathedral with a ceiling that curves into blackness. A space elevator shaft with no visible end. One team swore they stood on a balcony inside the Thule and looked out into space, but they were already in space. There should have been no balcony, no stars, and certainly no sun that blinked back. They came back different. One had no pupils. Another kept saying, "I'm still in there" for 3 days straight. They were not debriefed. They were sealed. The deeper you go, the more language degrades. Terms lose meaning. Compass bearings fail. Your own name stops sounding right when you hear it. One team resorted to playing Imperial hymns on loop through their Vox just to keep rhythm. When the music stopped, so did one of them. He didn't fall, he didn't scream, he just stopped, as if someone had turned him off. And always, beneath everything, the sound. Not machine noise, not metal stress. Something below that. A low pulse, a hum that isn't felt but remembered. Every survivor describes it. A frequency that shouldn't exist, but you carry it when you leave. Your dreams start to sync to it. You start hearing it in your own speech, in the cadence of your prayers. It's not loud, but it's always there, waiting. So what is Mortis Thul? Is it alive? Is it a creature? Is it a machine? An echo? A warp-translated ruin of something long dead? No one agrees, because every interpretation ends the same way. You stop interpreting, you stop asking, you start obeying. The Hulk doesn't demand worship, but it receives it. Pilgrims have been found inside, people who weren't aboard any known ship, wearing patchwork robes, eyes burned out, crawling toward engines that haven't fired in 10,000 years. They call it the Path, the Cradle, the Last Bastion. They say it's the only place the Emperor won't look, because he's already inside. That heresy would be purged on any world. But inside Mortis Thul, it just becomes part of the archive. Another hallucination, another shrine, another door you shouldn't open, and another one that opens anyway. This isn't about understanding anymore. This isn't about science or faith or even survival. This is about one truth. The kind of truth you only find when the map ends, when the coordinates stop, when the silence starts whispering your name in a voice that sounds like your own. And when you finally understand, you were never meant to come here, and it was never meant to let you go. It does not announce itself. There are no war horns, no warp storm heralds, no planetary bombardments or twisted sermons screamed across open Vox. It arrives like a shadow cast in reverse. By the time you know it's there, it's already been watching you for longer than you've existed. A world in the Reach goes dark. No impact. No energy spike. Just silence. Then comms delay. Then astropathic bleed. Then the first grainy pict capture. Something vast blotting out the stars above orbit. The Mortis Thule has returned. And every time someone says the same thing. It came back different. One appearance, it's cracked open, bleeding void matter across 36 clicks. Another. It's perfectly still. Clean. As if freshly constructed. The decks gleam. The outer hull sings like a choir. Another still. It looks like it's on fire. But no heat registers, and the flames don't move. You can't trust your senses. You can't trust the recordings. You can't trust your memory once you've seen it. Some say it's sentient, that it chooses where to appear, that it drifts through the warp not like a ship, but like a predator, smelling patterns, trauma, guilt, appearing wherever the veil between things has grown thin. Others argue that it's a byproduct of something else, that it's not the threat, but the leak. A slow extrusion of something deeper beneath the galaxy's skin, something too large to breach reality in full, and so it leaks in pieces. Some even whisper that Mortis Thul isn't moving at all, that the universe is collapsing toward it. But there's one thing no one argues. When it comes, it changes everything. Crusade routes bend around it, entire campaigns stall just to observe it. Religious movements rise in its wake. The children of the last breath believe it's the Emperor's coffin. The path of iron memory preaches that it's a soul grave of terror's lost dreams. And the Null Litany worships it as the only structure in the galaxy that will survive the end of time. None of them have returned from their pilgrimages, but the Hulk grows larger every time they go. There's a corridor reported by 5 different kill teams. None were deployed together, none came from the same chapter, none shared intel. But each one described the exact same hallway: black stone, gold trim, statues of unknown Astartes, faces eroded smooth. A door made of cracked marble, etched with a single line: "We were never meant to last." None of them could open the door. None of them ever found it again. One squad left a beacon. It disappeared. Another tried to destroy the statues. Their melters jammed. One exploded. A third refused to speak of it at all. They returned to Ariok and volunteered for silence. Not penance, silence. What do you do with a threat that cannot be classified? That cannot be predicted, charted, broken, or cleansed? What do you do with something that returns stronger every time you survive it? What do you do with a reminder? Because that's what Mortis Thul is, a reminder of what the galaxy used to be, of what it might still become, of what happens when you build an empire on broken truths and assume the past cannot reach you. The Jericho Reach is a graveyard, and in that graveyard, the Mortis Thul is the headstone no one buried. It drifts alone, but it is never empty. It kills without firing. It spreads without landing. It remembers. And every time you see it, truly see it, you leave something behind inside it. Maybe it's just a breath. Maybe it's your name. Maybe it's your future. The Imperium doesn't have a plan for Mortis Thul. They have protocols, detours, purges, but no plan. Because you can't plan for something that doesn't end. You can only watch for it, wait for it, and pray that when it comes back, it isn't already inside.